Welcome to First Sleep Aid, calm stories to help you unwind, learn, and fall asleep. From true crime to curious facts and thoughtful ideas, always softly spoken. Subscribe now and take a deep breath. You're in good hands.
All right, so today we're going deep on a case that I think is going to really stick with you guys.
Yeah, this one's a real head-scratcher.
It's the Hinterkaifeck Murders.
From 1922.
Yeah, 1922 in Bavaria, Germany. And we're talking a remote farmstead, 6 people brutally murdered.
And over a century later, we're still trying to figure out who did it and why.
Exactly. And we're going to be really careful here, obviously dealing with a really tragic event.
Absolutely.
We want to be respectful of the victims, and we're not interested in sensationalizing anything.
Just the facts.
And the context.
Right. We want to look at this case from all angles, the forensics, the psychology, what might have been going on in that family and the community at the time.
Yeah, we've got a lot of great source material articles, true crime databases, and we're going to break it all down for you.
Yeah, we're going to sift through it all, the key facts, the inconsistencies, the theories, and see if we can't shed a little light on this dark corner of history.
So picture this. You're in rural Bavaria in 1922, about 43 miles north of Munich.
Beautiful countryside, I imagine.
I would think so. And there's this farmstead called Hinterkaifeck. It means behind Kaifeck.
Okay, so kind of tucked away then.
Yeah, isolated, surrounded by woods, not exactly a bustling social hub. And this farmstead had been in the Gruber family since around 1863.
Oh, wow, so generations.
Yeah, but here's the thing. The actual farmhouse where all this took place is gone. It was demolished less than a year after the murders.
That's interesting, almost like they wanted to erase the memory of what happened there.
Maybe so.
Yeah.
But even though the physical place is gone, the story remains, and it all starts with the people who lived there, the Gruber family.
So who are we talking about here?
Okay, so the patriarch was Andreas Gruber. He was 63 at the time, and by all accounts, kind of a grumpy, reclusive guy.
Okay, not exactly Mr. Popularity then.
Not really. And then there's his wife, Cecilia. She was in her early 70s.
Right.
And then their widowed daughter, Victoria, she was 35, and she had 2 young children, 7-year-old Cecilia and 2-year-old Joseph.
Oh, that's heartbreaking.
It really is. And then there was the maid, Maria Baumgartner. She was 44, and she had just started working at the farm the day the murders happened.
Oh, wow. Talk about bad timing.
Yeah, it's just awful. But even before we get to the murders, there were signs that something wasn't right with this family.
What do you mean?
Well, there were rumors, whispers in the community about Andreas's relationship with his daughter, Victoria. Yeah, incest is what we're talking about. And it's not just hearsay. There were actually legal repercussions for them at some point.
Wow, so this was not exactly a secret then.
It seems not. In that kind of dynamic, the secrecy, the abuse, the isolation, it definitely creates a very specific and I'd say volatile atmosphere in that household.
Oh, absolutely. And you have to wonder how that might have contributed to what happened later.
For sure. And then you add to that the strange events that start happening in the months leading up to the murders.
Like what kind of strange events?
Well, about 6 months before the murders, the previous maid, Crescence Reiger, just up and quit.
That's not a good sign.
No, she claimed she kept hearing noises in the attic.
Spooky.
Right. She thought the house was haunted.
Ooh, yeah, I'd be out of there too.
And then in March 1922, just a few weeks before the murders, Andreas found a newspaper on their property.
What's so strange about that?
It was a Munich newspaper, which they didn't subscribe to, and nobody in the area knew anything about it.
Huh. That is weird.
And then a key to the farmhouse disappeared.
Okay, now we're getting into creepy territory.
And then it gets even weirder. Just days before the murders, Andreas found tracks in the snow leading to the machine room.
Someone sneaking around?
Yeah, and the lock on the room had been broken.
Hmm.
But here's the thing. There were no tracks leading away.
What? So they just vanished into thin air?
Pretty much. And on top of all that,
Yeah.
both Andreas and Victoria told neighbors they were hearing strange noises too.
Oh no, not the attic noises again.
Sounds like it. So you had this buildup of tension, this sense that something is very wrong at Hinterkaifeck.
Yeah, and you said the maid arrived on the day of the murders.
Yeah, March 31st, 1922. Maria Baumgartner arrived at the farm with her sister, who was probably the last person to see any of them alive.
And then what happened?
Well, nobody saw or heard from the family for days.
Oh no.
And on April 4th, some neighbors decided to go check on them.
I bet they weren't expecting what they found.
No, they found a scene straight out of a nightmare. Andreas Cecilia, Gruber Victoria, and little Cecilia were all found dead in the barn.
Oh, God.
And then inside the house, they found Maria Baumgartner and little Joseph, also dead.
All of them murdered.
Yes, all 6 of them have been brutally beaten to death.
Oh my God, what a horrific discovery.
It's truly awful, and the weapon they used was a mattock, a heavy farm tool that belonged to the family.
So it was a personal attack then?
It seems that way, and the details are really hard to hear.
I can only imagine.
Little Kazelia, the 7-year-old, she actually survived for hours after the attack.
Oh no.
The autopsy showed that she had pulled out clumps of her own hair. It's just heartbreaking.
It's unimaginable what that poor child went through.
And then there's another detail that really adds to the creepiness of this whole thing.
What's that?
Evidence suggests that the killer, or killers, stayed at the farm for days after the murders.
Really? They just hung out there?
Yeah, they fed the cattle, they ate food, they even kept the fire going.
That's so bizarre and disturbing.
It really is. And there's also this weird thing with the calendar they found in the house.
Like what?
It was open to April 1st, but the murders most likely happened on March 31st.
So someone ripped off a page.
It seems that way, and nobody knows why. Was it an attempt to confuse investigators or something else entirely?
Ugh, it just gives me chills.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in. And of course, when the police finally arrived at the scene, it was a mess.
How so?
Well, all those neighbors who had gone to check on the family, they had walked through the crime scene, touched things, moved things.
Oh no, talk about contamination.
Yeah, it made the investigators' job incredibly difficult. They were able to identify the murder weapon as the mattock, but it wasn't easy.
And did they ever find out why it happened? Who did it?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Robbery was initially considered, but they found a good amount of money in the house.
So maybe it wasn't about the money after all.
It's possible, although some accounts suggest that paper money might have been taken and that there was valuable jewelry missing.
So maybe robbery was part of the motive, or maybe it was staged to throw off the investigation.
Yeah, it's hard to say for sure. And then there's this other theory about the family being lured to the barn by their animals.
Oh yeah, I read about that, but it doesn't really make sense, does it?
No, because later analysis showed that you couldn't hear screams from the barn inside the house.
So how did they all end up in the barn then?
Exactly. It's another one of those details that just deepens the mystery.
So who are the main suspects then?
Well, there have been a lot of theories over the years, but none of them have ever been definitively proven.
Let's hear them, though. Walk us through the suspects.
Okay, so one of the early suspects was Victoria's husband, Carl Gabriel.
Wasn't he presumed dead in World War I?
Yeah, he was officially declared dead in 1914, but his body was never found.
So there's always that possibility that he could have survived.
Right. And some people believe that he might have come back to seek revenge, or maybe he was the father of Joseph and something went wrong.
There was that whole question about Joseph's paternity, wasn't there?
Exactly. There were rumors that Andreas might have been the father or even the neighbor, Lorenz Schlittenbauer.
A lot of potential drama there.
For sure. And then after World War II, there were some German prisoners of war who claimed that a German-speaking Soviet officer had confessed to the murders, and some people thought that officer might have been Carl Gabriel.
Oh, wow. That's an interesting twist.
Yeah, but the credibility of those claims has been questioned, so it's hard to know what to make of it.
So what about this neighbor, Lorenz Schlittenbauer? He seems like he was pretty involved in the whole thing.
Yeah, he was definitely a person of interest for the investigators, and for good reason. I mean, he was one of the people who discovered the bodies. But then he used a key that had been reported missing to get into the house.
Hold on a minute. That's suspicious.
Right, and he went in alone, even though the killer might still have been inside.
That's not exactly smart detective work, is it?
No, it's not. And he said he was looking for his son Joseph, but it just seemed odd to a lot of people.
And didn't he also make some strange comments about the murders later on?
Yeah, years later, he was overheard saying something about how the killer must have tried to bury the bodies, but the ground was too frozen.
How would he know that unless he was involved somehow?
Exactly. But then again, he lived in the area. He knew the soil conditions, so maybe it was just an educated guess.
It's hard to say for sure.
And Schlittenbauer always denied any involvement. He even sued people for slander when they accused him publicly.
So he was adamant that he was innocent.
He was, and he died in 1941, so we'll never know for sure what he knew.
Okay, so who else was on the suspect list?
Well, the former maid, Crescens Reiger, she pointed the finger at a few people.
Oh, really? Like who?
Well, she suspected the Bichler brothers, Anton and Carl, and a man named Georg Siegel.
What made her suspect them?
Well, Anton had worked on the farm. He knew the family, and she said he'd made some pretty disturbing comments about them in the past, like saying they should be dead.
Oh, yikes.
And she also claimed that the farm dog, which usually barked at strangers, never barked at Anton.
Interesting dogs can be good judges of character sometimes.
Right. And then there was Carl Bichler. She claims she saw him lurking outside her window one night.
Spooky.
And then George Siegel, he had also worked on the farm, and he knew where they kept the mattock.
So all three of them had connections to the farm and the family?
Exactly. And Reiger thought they might have worked together to kill the Groovers.
That's a possibility.
And she also suspected the Thaler brothers, especially Joseph Thaler, who had asked her a lot of questions about the family and their money.
So basically anyone who knew the family or had any reason to be at the farm was a potential suspect.
It seems that way, and then there's some more modern theories, like the one about Paul Mueller.
Who was Paul Mueller?
He was a German immigrant who was suspected in a bunch of axe murders in the U.S. around the turn of the century.
Axe murders.
Yeah, pretty brutal stuff, and there's some similarities between those cases and the Hinterkaifeck murders, isolated families, the use of a farm tool as a weapon, the bodies being stacked, and the lack of a clear robbery motive.
So this guy, Mueller, could have come back to Germany and continued his killing spree.
That's the theory, but it's a big leap to connect those cases across continents and over such a long period of time.
Yeah, I can see that.
And then there's the theory that Andreas Gruber himself was the killer.
Wait, the grandfather?
Yeah. Some people believe that he killed his family and then someone else killed him.
Why would he do that?
Well, remember we talked about the incest, the abuse, the control.
Oh, right.
Maybe he felt like he was losing control of his family, or maybe he just snapped.
That's a really dark thought.
It is, and there's no real evidence to support it,
Yeah.
but it's one of those theories that's hard to shake.
So I've got a war veteran, a jealous neighbor, a disgruntled ex-maid, an axe-wielding immigrant, and the possibility of a murder-suicide within the family.
It's a lot to consider. And the truth is, we may never know for sure what happened at Hinterkaifeck.
It's one of those cases that just stays with you.
It really does, and it makes you think about all the unanswered questions, all the what-ifs.
Yeah, what if the crime scene hadn't been contaminated? What if someone had spoken up sooner? What if the family hadn't been so isolated?
It's a tragedy on so many levels, and the fact that it remains unsolved just adds to the mystery and the intrigue.
So what do you think is the most compelling theory?
Honestly, I don't know. I go back and forth. It's easy to get caught up in all the different possibilities.
Yeah, I feel that.
And the truth is probably much more mundane than we imagine.
Maybe, but that doesn't make it any less fascinating or tragic.
Exactly. And I think that's why people are still talking about this case over 100 years later.
Yeah.
It's a reminder of the darkness that can exist even in the most idyllic settings.
And the fact that sometimes even the most brutal crimes go unpunished.
So for all of you listening out there, what do you think about the Hinterkaifeck murders? What stands out to you? What theory do you find most compelling?
And what is it about this case that keeps us coming back to it even after all these years?
Is it the mystery, the brutality, the injustice, or something else entirely?
Let us know your thoughts because we're dying to hear them.
And until next time, stay curious and keep digging.